They told me that it never rains in Abilene, and for 12 of my first 15 days, it rained, and it rained hard. So I don't know if Abilene is really this sunshiny place that I hope for, but I do hope that changes. I bring that up because I'm going to talk a little bit about expectations today and how expectations define our experience. But before, I do want to make a little bit more of an introduction for my wife and son. My wife is just an amazing, passionate, and much smarter than myself woman who serves and loves me and y'all so well. And the fact that I'm speaking today means that because of her, it's going to be half as short as it would have been. So we met in Uganda in 2013. We do have a son, Caleb Ruel. We call him Ru. And that's a picture of us. He's 4.5 months old now. And for those of you who can't see them in the back, they are here with me. We are excited to be here. We're honored to be here. And if there's anything that you hear from me today about my story, I want you to know this. My family is excited to partner with God and what He's going to do through you, our students. We believe that the best that God has for this campus is still yet to come, and it comes through the hearts and minds of those who commit 1 to 4 or maybe 5 or 6 years here at this university. And we're just grateful that He has chosen us to be a part of this. So we thank you for those who've been praying for us and our arrival. We thank you for those who have made it possible for us to be here. And we're just expectant for what God will do and that He will do unimaginable things. So let's jump in. I do want to talk about expectations because it's something that we all have, but sometimes we forget the nature of them and the power that they hold over us to define our experiences. My wife and I just bought a house, and we went for the first time to go visit this house, empty space, and just imagine what our life together would be like, sitting in an empty floor, enjoying one another. But when we got there, we opened the door, and we were hit with this wall of hazy smoke. And every expectation we had for imagining life together immediately was captivated by, oh no, our house is burning down. Everything's good. It turned out that something was wrong with the furnace, but when we walked into that space, we didn't get to enjoy the house in the way that we thought we would. Instead, I was calling the previous owners and repairmen trying to figure out what was going on, but that really shaped the moment that we thought we were going to share in that space. We even left, it was just Nicole and Caleb sitting outside while I was on the phone inside wondering, am I going to pass out or is it going to be okay? But I also want to share another story that I think is going to help capture my heart for the importance of placing our expectation in things eternal. In the light of some amazing things, the women's soccer team winning conference championship, that's an amazing thing, right? But the reality is, life after ACU or even after death, are those trophies that we get to take with us? No. Is it still good? Yes. Do we still celebrate it? Yes. But what happens with the things that we think matter most, are going to bring the most satisfaction to us? So 10 days ago, before I moved here, I was a groomsman in one of my best friend's weddings. And you guys, this wedding had more things go wrong than any wedding I have ever been to. It was 0% chance of rain in this outdoor wedding on the day of, and it rained all the way up to the moment of the ceremony, right? And all the groomsmen, we helped set up this outdoor venue, so we're setting up the chairs, and right here in this space, there's a hornet's nest in the ground. And so a couple people got stung, and for the whole ceremony, there's just this hole of chairs where nobody sat, which was really pretty and attractive, right? We're on our way to take pictures, and I'm tying his dad's tie, who's his best man, and I spill McDonald's coffee all over it. And the moment that I met Josh that morning, on the day of his wedding, on the day of his wedding, he told me that he had forgotten to renew his passport. And so the honeymoon to Mexico was canceled. Day of the wedding, right? And you know what amazed me in all of this? Josh and Leah had the most amazing day. And you know what I think that, or you know why I think that happened? I think it's because they weren't focused on the things that were falling apart, but they rested in the purpose for which they were there, right? They didn't focus on what they didn't have, but they took joy in the things that they were still given. And I believe they were able to be fully present with all the things that were going wrong because they knew on a deep level that the purpose of their wedding was so much more than the event. It was about their marriage. You know, we all have expectations. None of us want things like this to happen. I think it's safe to say that neither Josh or Leah expected any of this, and they had a strong belief, and rightfully so, that their wedding day was going to be hornet-free and it would end in a week on the beach in Mexico. That was a fair expectation, right? But we can find humor in these moments. But what I want to do to talk today, or what I want to talk about today, is something bigger than that. I want to talk about the hidden or the not so hidden expectations that we can have on ourselves, the people around us, and our lives as a whole, and how somehow they become deeply ingrained in our sense of worth and satisfaction. The passage that we're about to read comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, but I want to give a little backstory to this entire book. I'm actually going to do something that you should never do, which is teach an entire book in 12 minutes and focus on one verse. So all the Bible professors, I'm sorry. But the teacher that we're listening to in this book sounds like he has this really grim outlook on life. He focuses attention almost entirely on this somewhat depressing yet freeing truth that everything is meaningless. It's all vanity. And the word in this book of Ecclesiastes that they go back to when it says everything is vanity is the word hevel. And hevel means smoke or vapor. And so essentially what he's saying, it's like chasing after the wind. The book begins by focusing on the overwhelming magnitude of time, that this conference championship is one championship in the story of hundreds of others, hopefully, or thousands of years to come. And at the end of it, we're just a blip on the radar. We're a drop in the ocean. Our time on earth is so insignificant, it doesn't really matter. And so, to keep with that very positive mentality, he finishes this book by saying, we all die. And that's the story he tells, right? And it's in the chapters in between the magnitude of time and the reality of death that the teacher highlights and deconstructs many of the ways in which you and I try to find our meaning and purpose apart from God. Things like wealth, pleasure, status, career, relationships, views, likes, follows, achievements, grades. You guys, some of these things can be very good, but all of these are like chasing after vapor or smoke. You can see them, but you can't grab them. It has the appearance of something tangible, but not really something truly attainable, because when we get a hold of them, we can't hold on to them for long. And if we get them, we realize they don't satisfy us in the way that they thought we would. We're left disappointed. We're left wanting more. And even the hard work that we do isn't necessarily appreciated by those who come after us. They might not care about this or that vision that we poured our life into. And at the end of it all, we all die. So, if that doesn't get you excited for the rest of what I want to talk about, I don't know what will. Let's read together from Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 15. If you have your Bible, you can. We've got it on the board, on the projector. But the writer says in the middle of this story, "What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has placed eternity into man's heart, so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. But I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. And also that everyone should eat, drink, and take pleasure in all his toil, for this is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor taken away from it. God has done it so that people would fear before him. And that which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. I intentionally chose this story in these few verses because I believe that it highlights a few things. I think it normalizes the nature of our expectations, but also our disappointment in the world that we live in. It also highlights the gift that God gives us within the struggle. And then it points to the greater purposes of God in the face of this imperfect, broken world where nothing seems to be going the way that we want it to. The reality is if you haven't experienced a difficult season of unmet expectations, I think chances are 100% that you will. If you are here for the next 1 to 4 years, by the time you graduate, you all are going to face the disappointment of unmet expectations. Life right after college can be tough. It is not this rich moment of community where responsibility is low and relationship is high. Things change, and our expectations of this job that satisfy us and the time that we have to share with our friends, all of that gets a huge hit by reality. And so during my 3 years or 5 years of doing life with college students, I think back and I remember the countless times that students who have just graduated came back to me not just disappointed, but depressed because the world that they were stepping into was so different than what they had expected. They didn't get the job that they wanted, and even the ones that got the job that they wanted realized it didn't make them happy in the way that they thought it would, and even the ones who had that relationship that led to marriage struggled because their expectations were not about the purpose, it was about the event or the details. Now, the good news is all of these students that I know and talk with are wrestling really well, and God is still working in their life. But this is where we find ourselves. And so let's go back through these verses again, but we'll start this time in verse 11. It said that he has made everything beautiful in its time, and that he has placed eternity into man's heart so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. And this is where the author normalizes our feelings and our struggles. These verses follow this short poem about seasons and time where it says, there is a season for everything under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up, so on and so forth, a time to celebrate and a time to mourn. But then he also says there's a season or a time for rest and a time for struggle. And I want to make a quick note here because I think this puts a lot of things into perspective, but the verse itself highlights the tension that we find ourselves in. The eternity that God puts in man's heart looks like we are stuck on earth in this realm of time, but eternity is set on our hearts. And a good friend of mine, described it this way. He said that this tension that exists is a tension between our present calling and our eternal longing. Does anyone know that feeling? We long for the good things of heaven, and that is a good longing that God places in our heart, but the world around you is not as it should be, right? There's brokenness. I was in a prayer meeting this morning, and we were praying for sickness, for depression, for incredible loss, and there's this injustice in the face of the things that we desire that makes us realize, one, we have zero control, the world is not as it should be, and the despair, the disappointment, the depression that we feel is because our hearts long for good and godly things. The author then, in this tension of focusing on what God gives us, but desiring the things of heaven, as he points us in this new direction, and he encourages us to let go of the things that are out of our control and to focus on the things that are in our control. And he says, there's nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live, and that everyone should eat, drink, and take pleasure in his toil, for this is God's gift to man. The suggestion that we are given is to accept or even to expect that everything is out of our control, right? And he even suggests that it's our lack of control that gives us the gift of God, where God is challenging us to choose joy and to do good regardless of the way our plans have fallen apart. And right there, there's a gift of growth, a gift of witness, and those are the things that move into verse 14 and 15. In the middle of those verses, it says, God has done it so that people would fear before him. God honors the desires of our heart. He puts this tension there for us to wrestle with the good things of God in the present context of our eternal longing, right? And then he says, in this tension, I'm going to grow you. And then he gives you the why, and so that you would know me, but that all people would fear him. And for those of you who are wondering, why would God want to be feared? This context means to be revered, to be respected, so that the world would stand in awe of the goodness of God. And so, as we move forward, I want to give us three thoughts as to kind of how does this play out for us today, right? And the first, and these are in some ways topical, but the first is to surrender your expectations and learn to trust that God only gives the very best to his children. And so in the context of this passage, and in the context of kind of what we're talking about in expectations, I offer this story. Before I started working in college campus ministry, I was actually driving a recycling truck for a year and a half. And during that season, I knew that was a gift from God to me because it allowed me to do so many things. I worked for an amazing man. I got to make and earn enough money for marriage. And I was a part of a discipleship cohort. Yet, the expectations I had for that job were to work closely with someone every day in the truck for 10 to 14 hours, but I found myself alone wrestling with God, and I realized in that season that was God's best for me. And I say this because I applied for about a dozen jobs, and all of those came back no until I was hired at Lipscomb University to work as the director of mentoring. And I realized in that season that every no that God gives you is so that God can give you his very best yes. Every no that God gives you when you graduate from here is so that God can give you his very best yes. The thing that you want when he says no is not because he doesn't love you, it's because that his ability to imagine the best for you is far greater than our ability to imagine the best for ourselves. All right? So trust that God only gives his best to his children. Second point, learn that every season is a gift from God, and that in every season there are gifts from God to us. In that season that I was driving this recycling truck, a little backstory, I was supposed to work alongside of somebody who couldn't get a job at fair wages. This is why I love my boss. He would hire somebody who had a felony on his record, and he could not make more than $10 an hour anywhere. And he created this system to be encouraged and discipled to where these individuals could take care of their families. Well, something happened where instead of working with somebody all day, every day in a truck, one guy quit and another guy got injured. And for the next 14 months, I found myself driving this truck. I had a master's degree, and I was driving a commercial vehicle by myself for 14 hours a day, saying, God, I know this is your best for me, but this is not what I want. This is not what I expected, right? And in that moment, God did two things. He gave me these gifts that I feel like if I did not have them for the rest of my life, I would be disappointed. And those gifts were, I realized how often that I desire to be comfortable more than I desire God's will to be done. And the second thing is that I desired my situation to change more than I desired God's kingdom to come around me, right? And those were the gifts that God gave me in the tension, the growth that I had, and the lack of expectations. And finally, the last thing I want to share with us in regards to this passage as we go forward talking about faith and vocation, and that is, I'm missing my point. That is, remember the principles of grace in the face of our striving. And I think there are two quotes from Dallas Willard that really capture my heart for this principle. The first is that grace is God acting to accomplish in your life what you cannot accomplish on your own. If you've not heard that, grace is God doing something in you and through that you can never do by yourself. And the second thing that he says is grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. And so the things that God gives us and grants us to live as citizens of heaven for the good of the world around us is not because we have worked so hard to make the world a better place, but that God has chosen to partner with us and work in us and through us for the good of those around us. And so I want to close with this note of encouragement, and then I'm going to pray. But I want to encourage you guys as you guys are wrestling with this next season of your life, the next job, the next thing where you have hidden expectations. I want to encourage you to be present in the struggle. When your job isn't what you wanted, or it turns out to not be the things that you thought, I encourage you to press in, and I encourage you to encourage those around you who are struggling to be present. And I believe that if we do this, God has something special for us in our growth and maturation, but more than that, in our ability to be present with God in the tension, He is giving us a gift to the world where people can see the work of God in us and through us. And so my encouragement to us is, as life gets hard, don't seek your comfort over what God desires to do in you and through you. Don't seek your situation to change more than you want God's will to come. Be present in the tension, knowing that God can and will use your challenging and adverse situations for the glory of God around you. Pray with me as we close out. God, we thank you for the good gift that is to belong to a community. We thank you for the people in our lives here on this campus who are encouraging us towards the good things of God, who are encouraging us to be present when we realize the world around us is not as it should be. God, I pray that ACU and that the city of Abilene would be different because of the way that we do life together here, because of the way that we choose to be present in the struggle. And God, I pray for the energy and the courage to say yes to you, even when it means our situations are uncomfortable, they aren't what we want. Would we trust that you, God, only give your very best to us as your children, and that we would live so that the world would know you. Jesus, it's through you that we give thanks, and we pray. Amen. Y'all are dismissed.